and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akari. The headlines. Ukraine President's office calls Yasiv Yar attack an act of terrorism, says Russia should be on the list of state terrorist sponsors. Russia claims to have shot down 3 Ukrainian jets over the Donetsk region. And Ukraine officials expressed deep disappointment over Canada's decision to return the Nord Stream 1 turbine to Germany. We begin the program this morning with more on the Russian rockets which struck an apartment block in Chasiv Yar in Ukraine's Donetsk region. The State Emergency Service says 6 people have been rescued from under the rubble of the building in Chasiv Yar, and at least 18 people have been killed. 20 more people are found buried under the rubble of the one side of the 5-story building that was ripped apart by the rockets. However, in the south, Ukrainian forces fired missiles at the Russian-occupied city of Kherson. One Ukrainian official says a Russian military base was hit, while Russian reports say a hospital was damaged and a house destroyed. Russian media said Kherson's air defense system fired back and 4 explosions were heard in the city, and that a Ukrainian missile destroyed a house, injuring 2 people. Another report said a hospital was damaged in the attack.
Authorities said at least 15 people were killed as the Russian rockets hit a 5-story apartment block in the Donetsk region. No fewer than 20 people were feared trapped under the rubble. Chief of Staff to President Zelensky, Andriy Yermak, said on Telegram that the strike was another terrorist attack and that Russia should be designated as a state sponsor of terrorism as a result. A bill to apply this label has been tabled by 2 U.S. senators who expressed their confidence the proposal will be voted through during a Thursday visit to Kyiv. Local officials say Russian rockets damaged the school and a health center for children in Kharkiv, also on Sunday morning. Local residents think Russia targets Ukraine schools on purpose to prevent Ukrainians from learning their own language and culture. Russian forces have been pounding Kharkiv for weeks now, renewing its shelling of the region and the surrounding countryside in what Kyiv says is a bid to force Ukraine to pull resources from the main battlefield in Donbas to protect civilians from attack. Russia denies targeting civilians in its so-called special military operation to demilitarize Ukraine.
Meanwhile, this video from the Ukrainian Ministry of Emergency shows workers freeing a man from the rubble of a destroyed apartment block in the Donetsk region. Rescue workers helped the man out from beneath the wreckage before carrying him on a stretcher towards a van. While others are still found trapped in the rubble, the emergency services say rescuers were in verbal contact with 3 people who are still underneath the rubble. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says there was no let-up in Russian airstrikes on his country. Speaking during his nightly video address, Mr. Zelensky said the death toll from the attack on the Donetsk town of Chasiv Yar was likely to rise. President Zelensky also refuted claims that Russian airstrikes had been caused.
I've been receiving reports all day today from the city of Chasiv Yar in the Donetsk region. A rescue operation after a Russian attack on residential buildings is on the way there. 2 residential high-rise buildings were destroyed. Dozens of people are under the rubble. 6 were saved. There are 15 names on the list of the dead, and unfortunately, this is not the final number. In the past week, many have mentioned about the alleged operational pause in the actions of the occupiers in Donbas and other parts of Ukraine. 34 airstrikes by Russian aviation in the past 24 hours, and 1 past day is an answer to all those who invented the who invented this pause. The Ukrainian army is holding on, holding firm and dealing with attacks in various directions. But of course, a lot still needs to be done so that Russian losses become such that there will really be a pause.
Meanwhile, President Zelensky's chief of staff has called the attack on Chasiv Yar a terrorist act and has again called for Russia to be officially considered a state sponsor of terrorism. Andrew Yermak wrote on Twitter that the Russians hit a high-rise apartment building with civilians again, another terrorist attack by a terrorist country. That's a quote. The Russian Federation should be on the list of state sponsors of terrorism, according to him. And there are reports of more shelling as the city of Kharkiv came under missile fire by Russian forces 3 times today. That's according to the Ukrainian State Emergency Service. The service says there were no injuries reported yet, but an 86-year-old woman was rescued from underneath the rubble of a 6-story residential building. The service said 2 other missiles hit a yard near a warehouse as well as a school building in the Slobodisky district of the city. In other developments, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has thanked the United States for the latest infusion of humanitarian aid announced over the weekend. Mr. Kuleba said, quote, grateful to the U.S. for the unfaltering support for Ukraine. Additional humanitarian, financial, and military aid is crucial as Ukraine continues to defend itself from Russia's barbaric aggression, unquote. The equipment included 4 high-mobility artillery rocket systems, HIMARS, and additional ammunition, 155 mm artillery ammunition, and demolition munitions. The Defense Department said that the United States has committed $2.2 billion of security assistance to Ukraine in the last 3 weeks as they support the country's fight against Russia. And the Russian Defense Ministry says Russian forces struck 2 Ukrainian army hangars storing U.S.-produced M77 howitzers, a type of artillery weapon near Kotsyonivka in the Donetsk region. The Ukrainian Regional Military Administrator said 1 person had been killed there in the last 24 hours. The ministry also said the U.S.-made M77 howitzers had been used to shell residential areas of Donetsk. Ukrainian military spokespeople were not immediately available for comment. And Ukrainian officials have expressed deep disappointment at a decision by the Canadian government to return a repaired turbine that is part of Russia's gas pipeline to Europe. The Ukrainian Foreign and Energy Ministries blasted the return of the turbine as, quote, bending the sanctions regime to the whims of Russia and urged the Canadian government to rethink. The ministry said in a statement that this dangerous precedent goes against the rule of law and has only one consequence. It will reinforce Moscow's sense of impunity. The statement, published on the Energy Ministry's website, called on the Canadian government to reverse its decision and said that returning the turbine would amount to adjusting the sanctions imposed on Moscow to that country's whims. And U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he has discussed Russian aggression in Ukraine during more than 5 hours of talks with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, in which he raised concerns over Beijing's alignment with Moscow. Mr. Blinken was speaking at the news conference after his first in-person discussions with Wang since October, a day after attending a meeting of G20 foreign ministers on the Indonesian island of Bali. Mr. Blinken said Chinese President Xi Jinping had made it clear in a call with President Vladimir Putin on June the 13th that he stood by a decision to form a partnership with Russia. Shortly before Russia's February 24th Ukraine invasion, Beijing and Moscow had announced a, quote, no-limits partnership, although U.S. officials have said they have not seen China evade tough U.S.-led sanctions on Russia or provide it with military equipment. U.S. officials have warned of consequences, including sanctions, should China offer material support for the war that Moscow calls a special military operation to degrade the Ukrainian military. Kiev and its Western allies say the invasion is an unprovoked land grab. Despite their rivalry, the world's 2 largest economies remain major trading partners, and Mr. Biden has been considering scrapping tariffs on a range of Chinese goods to curb surging U.S. inflation before November's midterm elections, with control of Congress in focus.
I shared again with State Councilor, that we are concerned about the PRC's alignment with Russia. Now, what you hear from Beijing is that it claims to be neutral. I would start with the proposition that it's pretty hard to be neutral when it comes to this aggression. There's a clear aggressor, there's a clear victim, there's a clear challenge not only to the lives and livelihoods of people in Ukraine, but there's a challenge to the international order. More than 4 months now into this brutal invasion, the PRC is still standing by Russia. It's echoing Russian propaganda around the world. It's shielding Russia in international organizations. I believe it's shirking its responsibilities as a P5 member, as I said, and even engaging in joint military exercises. We saw that just recently with the strategic bomber control in East Asia. So what I tried to convey to the State Councilor is this really is a moment where we all have to stand up, as we heard country after country do in the G20. If you were Foreign Minister Lavrov sitting in that room, you heard not only a chorus of condemnation when it comes to Russia's aggression against Ukraine, but you heard country after country insisting that Russia let the grain out of Ukraine to get onto world markets. The only thing that's holding it back is a Russian blockade of the Black Sea ports and Odessa. And so we'll see if Russia got the message. We'll see by its actions over the coming days and weeks whether it actually cooperates with the effort that the UN is leading in partnership with Turkey to find a good mechanism to allow the grain to get out. There was a strong consensus, and Russia was left isolated, as it has been many times since this war began. In fact, Foreign Minister Lavrov left the meeting early, maybe because the messages had become so resoundingly clear.
Let's talk now to Gustav Gressel, Senior Policy Fellow with the wider Europe program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Nice to see you once again, Gustav. Good morning.
Good morning.
Gustav, of course, joins us from Brussels in Belgium. Let's start off with that last story we just aired, shall we? The issue of the grain exports, which is one of the developments that is having worldwide effect as we speak. What do you think really, I mean, we understand that Russia is blockading the Black Sea, but then there have been attempts by the UN and Turkey, which Antony Blinken reinforced there, to get Russia in a kind of deal to allow the grain exports proceed. Why is that being held back, especially because Turkey had given the impression that if Russia's demand to be let out of some of the sanctions that had been imposed on it was met, then this was a done deal?
Yeah, that's actually the problem. So the Russians are trying to score, sort of to combine demands to the easing of the blockades that are quite untakeable for the Europeans, and that have nothing to do with grain situation themselves. So the problem is the grain can't come down because there's a naval blockade of the Black Sea ports, and the land transport ways are also partially bombed, and partially they have a very low capacity because different GOG systems in the railway systems, fuel crisis for trucks, etc. If you would allow the international access to the freighters and have escorts and sort of clear some path through the minefields, you could export them. But the problem is the Russian Black Sea Fleet, of course, has means to attack that even clandestinely, so it would need to have an agreement on the route of the convoys, on the escort of the convoys, on the supervision. And here, sort of Russia says, I won't allow that unless you do me favors. And this is like you have a hostage taker that, of course, demands reward for freeing hostages, etc. And the other countries go like, if we start with Russia negotiating this way, they are very good hostage takers. They will just be encouraged to take the next hostage. And that's roughly the situation at the moment.
Let's come to the wider diplomatic situation. It doesn't look as if there's emphasis on peace talks anymore. The battleground has shifted to eastern Ukraine, where Russia, even though slowly, is having more success militarily on the ground there. It's got Donetsk now, and then it is after Luhansk. And some of those I've spoken to indicate that sooner or later it will also get Luhansk. Now, if that is the case, does that leave Ukraine with any bargaining chips any longer, even though it continues to have the support of its Western allies militarily and otherwise?
So yes, for Russia at the moment, it looks that the way to victory is very slow and very bloody, but it's still a way to victory. For the Ukrainians, on the other hand, they can induce a lot of losses to the Russian side, and they have the backing of the West. That means weapons deliveries. And you can now, of course, make your bet who will run out of steam first, the Russian offensive, or will running out of steam because of increased weapon deliveries and increased lethality of the Ukrainian side, or will the Russians manage to do it? For the time being, the Russians think they can pull it through, and that although the support by the West to the Ukrainians is annoying and causes losses, they still can drive on to victory. The Ukrainians are quite confident that with new deliveries coming up, and the problem is only they and the Americans know some of the next delivery batches that are scheduled to come in the recent months, they can turn the tide of the war roughly in autumn.
Given that scenario and something else that happened over the weekend, the meeting between the Americans and the Chinese, who seem to be the silent player in all of this equation. China has made it clear that it is in a partnership with Russia, but as we've referenced, there's no clear evidence that they're actually offering Russia anything beyond rhetorical support, no military aid, no weapons, and so on. But is there the possibility that if it gets to the situation which you've just described, which is that Ukraine continues to get weapons deliveries and all of that, China might step in to also assist Russia?
I honestly don't think so. So the Chinese have been offered this role as a negotiator and an intermediate, but they have declined at numerous occasions. They see the war with great interest. It's a test bed of also military systems that they themselves employ. They also do not want to humiliate Putin and Russia in terms of contributing to what might be seen as a defeat of Russia. On the other hand, they don't want to clearly back the Russians beyond the rhetorical backing that they're doing now for the fear of secondary costs in other parts of the world. This is why they sort of try, at least in official rhetoric, to stay out of it as much as they can and rather support the Russians in, or to use the war in the kind of anti-American, anti-Western rhetoric that they put on for their own sake of interests. If there is a neutral intermediator between the two, I would rather think that Turkey might play that role, but I don't see any eagerness on the Chinese side to really do that. Also, if it's, for example, remember the negotiations about North Korea's nuclear program, China has not been a very outspoken negotiator. It has been a facilitator in terms of infrastructure and bringing people together, but it led to the Americans do the talk on the one side and the North Koreans on the other. Being a neutral peace mediator is not something that the Chinese foreign bureaucracy is very familiar with and what they perceive themselves as being their natural foreign policy role.
But do you think this could have anything to do with China's own designs and intentions, given the ripe environment over Taiwan, that they're looking at this as a possible dress rehearsal for if and when that might become necessary, because they've made it clear that should Taiwan attempt to declare independence formally, they will take it by force?
Yes, and I think that before the war, I mean, we all know that the Chinese have been informed by the Russians before the war That was basically their outline and their look at the war. So they thought, and they were informed, of course, by the Russians, that this will be a short and successful campaign and Ukraine will fall in a couple of days, if not weeks. And they thought that, well, let the Russians do that because this will induce a shock moment to the West and the West and especially the American self-confidence to defend other countries. Now, of course, going more than 4 months into the war and Kiev is not falling at all, things look very different. It's not the kind of shock moment for the West anymore. It did not expose too much Western weakness and indecisiveness. On the other hand, the Russian military, which was the role model for Chinese military in terms of military reforms, applying new technologies, then although the Chinese military technology-wise is more advanced, the Russians were able to try out things in Syria and in Ukraine, etc. All these military machinery now looks less bright and confident and effective, and that, of course, makes Beijing also look into their own machinery and ask themselves, well, what lessons do we have to learn and digest before challenging the West? Because if we want to do that, be it over Taiwan or over other elements of the 9-dash line, we need to make sure that we're going to be successful in this.
Indeed. That's another perspective that is and that will be interesting to watch. Gustav Gressel, thank you so much for your time and your perspective this morning from Brussels. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman has criticized the United Kingdom Foreign Secretary Liz Truss's early departure from Bali ahead of last week's G20 meeting as a deep boycott of the Russian delegation. According to TASS news agency, Maria Zakharova said, it is a kind of deep boycott of the Russian delegation to leave a day before. Truss cut short her attendance at the G20 foreign ministers meeting in Indonesia to fly back to London to canvass support for her bid to succeed Boris Johnson as the United Kingdom's next prime minister. Meanwhile, Indonesia's foreign minister says that the Ukraine war was discussed at almost all bilateral meetings at the G20 event, where some participants condemned Russia's invasion and urged an immediate end to hostilities during diplomacy and talks. Retno Marsudi, in remarks as chair of the gathering in Bali, praised G20 counterparts for attending in person amidst global tensions over the impacts of the Ukraine war, decisions she said should not be taken lightly. She also said food and energy security and the reintegration of Ukraine and Russia's grain and fertilizer into supply chains was critical. It was not immediately clear from Retno's briefing whether any agreements had been reached during the meeting.
This is for the first time the G20 foreign ministers meeting sit together in one room to discuss important issues confronting all of us. The decision of members and the invitees to attend the meeting in person are not to be taken lightly. They choose to make an extra effort to be here. There is a strong push from many participants for an immediate end to the war and peaceful resolution of conflict through diplomacy and negotiations. All participants were concerned about soaring prices of food and energy and reiterated that current crisis, including issues related to their accessibility, affordability and sustainability, will continue to hinder global recovery. Developing countries will be the most affected, particularly low-income countries and small island developing countries. There is an urgent need to address global food supply chain disruption. Reintegrating food and fertilizer from Ukraine and Russia into global market is critical. Some participants also call for a stronger partnership and collaboration in achieving energy security and accelerating transition to clean and renewable energy through research cooperation, investment, and affordable transfer of technology.
The same point was reinforced by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who has urged China and members of the Southeast Asian bloc, ASEAN, to put pressure on Myanmar's rulers to return to democracy and to hold it accountable to a peace deal agreed with the group. Speaking at a news conference in Bangkok during a tour of Asia, the U.S. diplomat also referred to food insecurity in Asia, saying that Russia's invasion of Ukraine could continue to contribute to the food insecurity in the area. With Black Sea ports blockaded by Russia, he warned of rising costs for farmers.
What we are seeing around the world is growing food insecurity that has been significantly exacerbated by the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And as we've had opportunity to discuss in recent days, there are more than 20 million tons of grain that are sitting in silos in Ukraine that can't get out to feed people around the world because Russia is blockading Ukraine's ports in Odessa, the Black Sea. We have a fertilizer crisis that is having a real impact here in Thailand. Fertilizer shortage, prices that have gone sky high. That's very significant, especially in a farming country, a vibrant farming country like Thailand, because in the absence of fertilizer, we know that means that next year yields will go down, prices potentially will go up.
And the conflict between Moscow and Kiev can only be resolved through diplomacy. That's according to former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, adding that he will continue to use every opportunity to talk to Russian President Vladimir Putin. The former German Chancellor, who was earlier forced to leave the board of Russian oil giant Rosneft, is now facing possible expulsion from his Social Democratic Party, SPD. His perceived close relations with Moscow are cited as one of the reasons why the party considers his behavior damaging to its image. Mr. Schröder, however, believes that the idea of isolating Russia politically is flawed. Russia is, quote, interested in a negotiated solution, he claims, as he blamed Kiev for the stalled talks with Moscow. Mr. Schröder, who sought to act as a mediator between Ukraine and Russia in early March, said that the Ukrainians did not want any commitments written down. Such a position made any serious talks impossible at that stage, according to him. The former chancellor also dismissed the West's focus on supplying Ukraine with arms. He reiterated that all nations, including those not directly involved in the conflict, should work together to find a diplomatic solution instead. And the world will never be safe as long as modern-day Russia exists, former Polish President Lech Walesa told French broadcaster LCI over the weekend, claiming that Russia is imperial in nature and will keep annexing peoples. Even if Western nations could help Ukraine to win its ongoing conflict with Moscow, they would still fail to make the world a safe place. Mr. Walesa argued, adding that the international community would potentially see another conflict involving Russia in 5 years. In 10 years, we will see another Putin arise, he says, referring to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is increasingly portrayed as an autocratic strongman by Western officials and the Western media. To avoid such a development, the West, quote, must force a change of political system in Russia, and that's according to the former Polish president. If it proves to be impossible, organizing an uprising would be another option. And let's stay in Poland, because joining us now is Dr. Michał Maciejacek, family medicine specialist at the Polish Mothers Hospital right there. Good morning to you, Doc. Nice to see you again this morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Nice to see you as well.
The situation seems to have fallen off the radar in terms of refugees and people requiring treatment and the kind of medical challenges that are being faced by people moving from Ukraine to other parts of the world, particularly Poland. Now, in the case of Poland, you and I have discussed this several times over the last couple of months of this conflict. If you take, for example, the situation with COVID-19, many Ukrainians were not vaccinated before the war started. And, of course, vaccination became impossible after that. So they're moving with potential to other countries that were already battling that problem. Could you tell us today what is the situation on the ground in Poland as you know it?
The situation is that typically every year between June and August, we see that the amount of patients in primary care is much lower than other parts of the year. And this year it's even bigger than it was in April or May. So basically we are facing a lot of extra patients, not only with COVID, but with different infections. And that's also the time of holidays in Poland. So the amount of doctors is a bit lower, and we start to struggle with helping everybody. And the problem with COVID is starting to grow up. We see the amount of positive tests growing. And our government decided by the end of May that they will stop massive testing. I think it was a mistake, but now we don't have a proper data to really focus on. But on the amount of people that I see in my practice, definitely that problem is growing and growing quite fast. The good news is that that particular variant of COVID is less problematic. It's a infection that lasts 7 to 10 days, and in most cases doesn't need hospitalization on serious treatment. But that can change in any moment. And if you look on the statistics of Germany or England, they have hundreds of thousands new cases a day. So that's what's coming. And even the best prognosis says that by the end of summer, we will have another wave.
You are a family medicine specialist, so I mean, you get to see children, you get to see their mothers, and of course you get to see their fathers. Now, apart from worldwide pandemics such as COVID, what else are you getting to see apart from the common things that afflict people who are living in very inclement conditions, possibly in camps and all of that? They don't have the right clothing and or the right even diet and all that. Do you, for example, because the thing that is happening in Europe, in parts of Europe, is monkeypox. I haven't heard any reports of that, of course, in Poland, but you could update us if it's different. That's on one hand, but what are the other ailments you're getting to see?
About the monkeypox, the situation is that we had, I think, 3 cases that were confirmed in Poland, but it's not spreading too much, and that's really just a few checks and 3 positive cases. So that doesn't be a problem, at least soon. But we definitely see much more cases of diarrhea and problems with digestive system. And it's not only because of the conditions, because most of those people are actually lives at homes with Polish families. The camps are that's a very limited number of people that lives there. But you said yourself that the diet is another problem. It's a bit different diet than they are having at their homes. And the second to all of that is that we've been apart from each other for best part of last 2 years. Now the situation is then when we are meeting together, we have a similar situation as children in primary schools in the beginning, that they interchange their diseases and getting sick a bit more often. That's what's happening here, and it's not only respiratory system diseases, but also diarrhea, that kind of problems. But it's nothing too massive, but it's starting to put a lot of pressure on especially on primary care.
That was going to be my next question, because at the base of all of this is access to health care and how overwhelmed or not practitioners like yourselves are. I know that when we spoke for the first and second times, you were seeing quite a lot of people because there was a very large influx at that time, and you were saying that the facilities may not be able to cope. Is that still the situation? And are you as a person who owns a practice, or as a country, which is Poland, getting the much promised help that you and I talked about a few months ago?
We are on a big pressure. At that point, we are coping with it. So it's not the situation without any, but if we will get even a bit more patients, and it's coming because of the next wave in autumn, we will have a problem. The good thing is that the Polish government actually dissolved the problem of prescriptions and access for the Ukrainians to Polish healthcare system. That's the good part. The bad part is that the amount of doctors is still the same as it was. And as I told earlier, we are in a basically starting, but for next 2 months we have a holiday season, so a lot of people are getting their time off, so the amount of doctors is a bit smaller, and that's the problem. Now, if we didn't get too much help from outside, that's for sure, and I don't see it coming. Basically, at that point, I think that it will still take months or even years to dissolve the problem in Ukraine, and a better part of the refugees that are in Poland, even if they would like to go back to Ukraine, even if you would stop the war today, they don't have anything to go back to. Some of the cities are completely ruined, and there is a different story if you are just an adult that needs to rebuild your home. But if you have 2 or 3 kids, there is no way to live during winter in Ukraine without any supplies, without heating, without energy. So there is a huge problem, and it's a problem for years, not days, not weeks, but years. In my opinion, rebuilding of Ukraine will take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money. And we need to prepare for that because there is no other way to do it.
Thank you so very much, Mikhail Maciejacek, family medicine specialist at the Polish Mothers Hospital. Stay safe, my friend.
Thank you very much. All the best, and hope to talk to you soon.
The French government is preparing for a total cutoff of Russian gas supplies, which it sees as the most likely scenario in its forward planning, and that's according to French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire. With about 17% of its supply coming from Russia, France is less dependent on Russian gas than some of its neighbors, but the government has been preparing contingency plans. A cutoff is particularly problematic now because France's nuclear power generation would struggle to pick up the slack, as many reactors are currently down for maintenance. Mr. Le Maire told the conference in southern France, that the country should prepare for a total cutoff of Russian gas, and that remains to be the most likely scenario. Mr. Le Maire also said the first line of defense was for households and businesses to cut energy consumption, then the construction of new infrastructure like a floating plant that will be able to regasify liquid natural gas shipments from overseas. Meanwhile, the Russia-Ukraine conflict has exacerbated energy price hikes while pushing up fertilizer costs and further impeding food availability. That's according to Maximo Torero-Cullen, chief economist at the UN Food and Agricultural Organization. According to a report by the FAO, the number of people affected by hunger rose to 828 million in 2021, an increase of 46 million from the previous year. The report said one of the factors for this is the ongoing war in Ukraine, which has been disrupting supply chains and further affecting prices of grain, fertilizer, and energy. Mr. Cullen also addressed problems arising from sanctions that some countries have imposed since the onset of the crisis, saying they will also hamper food availability.
The major problem of the war of Ukraine for us is the relationship between energy prices and fertilizer prices. So what we are observing is that the prices of gas has gone up. That has increased the cost of producing fertilizers, specifically nitrogen, which Russia Federation is the first exporter of nitrogen in the world. the second of potassium, and the third of phosphorus. Now, by restricting their exports and by the increase in energy, European Union, for example, which is another key exporter of nitrogen, has to start reducing their production. The same happened in the UK, which even closed a plant. And that has increased the price of fertilizer, which have affected affordability of inputs for farmers. The consequence of that is that farmers will be using less fertilizers in the next planting season. This is the planting season 2021, 2022, and that could affect yields and the level of exports available for next year. So our major concern is that next year, 2023, could be a year in which we do not only have a problem of food access, but also potentially a problem of food availability.
Coming up after the break, the breakdown of the business news with NA John McWava, Business Desk. Plus, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visits the wounded in Dipno Hospital, presenting medals to soldiers in their hospital beds. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. Let's talk now to NA John McWava, our Business Desk, as promised, to unpack some of the major headlines this morning. Morning, Nini.
Good morning.
I know it's a public holiday here in Nigeria, but elsewhere in the world, things are happening.
Yes.
In Bulgaria and Greece, a new gas pipeline to reduce dependence on Russia has just been opened.
Yes, remember Bulgaria was cut off in April, and so they've had to look for alternative. So good enough, they have Azerbaijan coming to their aid, connecting this to European countries. Azerbaijan has about 35 trillion cubic gas reserve as of 2017. So hopefully they can play, you know,
some kind of role in easing this.
Exactly, and help especially countries like Bulgaria. You know, the smaller countries in Europe have been going through a whole lot because of this.
And their demand may not be so much as to overwhelm.
Exactly, and their voice may not be so high, you know, in the EU, you know, to direct policies and decisions. Indeed. So, but I guess for now, this is what they are looking at for power, for energy and gas. Probably
others will need to take a look at that too. Those affected.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean they're reserved. They also have their own demand, although according to research, their reserve is about 95% times more than what they consume. But right. It's not going to be there forever, you know. So at some point they might go back
to maximize.
Yes. Remember we talked about gas protectionism?
Indeed.
Yeah, by countries, they might also bring that in. So.
Yes, especially if it's beginning to affect their own economic standing.
Domestic
now, in Japan, Japan, of course, is still reeling from the assassination of its former prime minister. Yeah. But there is a gas-saving scheme, because Japan is another country that is caught in the crosshairs of all of this, but whose voice hasn't been too loud.
Too loud, yes. I guess their voice haven't been too loud because they get about 10%, 9–10% of their gas from Russia, but it's still something that's going to affect their supply. So what they're doing now, what they're asking for now is actually voluntary for consumers. Please taper down on your use of energy, on your use of gas, try to reserve and all that. But they're saying, and they're having a meeting, I think today or tomorrow, and they're saying that if it continues, well, we don't see it ending. We don't see.
Yes, my last guest actually said that there's nothing on the horizon to
that shows anything. That. So if it continues, then they might go beyond the voluntary to involuntary and then compel consumers. And we do hope it doesn't get to what's happening in Sri Lanka, where they had to shut down schools, and offices,
yes, and create so much social upheaval.
Exactly, up to what's has escalated to what we see going on there now. But I mean, countries, you know, Germany has also started their own emergency. Indeed. UK has started their own emergency.
Absolutely.
Remember, we talked about that some weeks ago. So a whole lot of countries are beginning to set up these schemes, which is supposed to serve or save energy, because
supplies, they're working on the on the
it's not looking so certain as it used to be before now.
Now, in a different direction, and we've reported that, which is that Canada has returned Russia's gas turbines. And some of those, I mean, the turbine let's put it in context. The turbine was sent to Canada for repair.
For repairs.
And that was before this happened. Now, when this happened, the expectation was that Canada was going to hold on to it.
Yes, I mean, that at least that's what Ukraine was expecting. But you remember that we talked about the Nord Stream 1.
Indeed.
You understand, that stopped gas supply to Germany, and we said maybe it's maintenance or, you know, real maintenance. Well, this is actually connected, according to them, that this turbine is supposed to help restore that.
Right.
You know,
so if Canada holds on to it, then Russia has a really good reason.
So Canada is giving it to Germany. Germany is supposed to give it to Russia, so that Canada is not erring or not going against the sanction. But I mean, we know the bottom line of it. But guess what? There's a maintenance for that same pipeline scheduled for July 11 to July 25th or 21st or so. So even if it is returned, we're not sure that...
Yeah, because incidentally, July 11 is today.
It's today.
So, if it's going to go to Germany first and then go through the process, by the time it finally arrives, it will be way past this time.
Yes.
I mean, this is something that a lot of people are...
Yeah, so maybe it goes back to that quoting maintenance that we're talking about.
Indeed, and which we have been talking about.
Which we have been talking
because there's been quite a bit of maintenance involved in different
at this
places.
Time, and it's so connected to the unfriendly, especially Germany.
Yes, the unfriendly countries.
At the top of it.
Now, the high cost of, maybe you should unpack this. What is shrinkflation? I mean, I know about inflation, I know about deflation.
You know about stagflation?
Stagflation.
Now it's shrinkflation.
What is shrinkflation?
Yeah, well, you know, when we do talk outside this at broadcasters, we have new words every day. There are some words that we said were not legal or acceptable.
10 years ago, 20 years ago, but now...
So this is a new one, kind of in the economic space, shrinkflation. So what has happened is, I'm sure you're actually feeling this. Yesterday, I bought plantain chips. It's 100 naira. But it used to have some pieces that you could take and take a drink and be okay.
Right.
Yesterday, when I took it, it was about half.
Okay.
Of what it not. That is shrinkflation.
Okay, so same price, less quantity.
Sometimes higher price.
So, okay,
sometimes talk about sardines. How many fishes do you have in sardines now?
Yeah, I got into some hot water with you guys when I mentioned that, so I'm not going to repeat it again today.
So that is shrinkflation. So it's they can't do it to our petrol, I think, you know, because it's
that
just
one
the
is
price that is going up.
Exactly.
But a lot of packed foods are actually going through shrinkflation now because they have been shrunk, they have reduced in price, in size, but the bread.
Oh, Nigerians are quite familiar with this shrinkflation. I think maybe
but just putting a name
to it is what they're not familiar with, because most people who sell things know that because of the economic environment, most people can't afford to pay more.
Yes.
But if you keep the price steady but reduce the quantity, then allows you to have a margin to make. So rather than increase the price, most people have opted to reduce the quantity and keep the price.
I hope it doesn't affect the quality.
That's an entirely different. That's an entirely different argument, and one will be hoping, just like you, that in fact is
for health purposes, especially.
Indeed. There's even a separate argument, because some of the health regulatory agencies like NAFDAC, the workers are on strike.
And standards are going to,
the workers are on strike. So that, I mean, if you took a look at some of the media, some of the papers over the weekend, that was the highlight, you know, that, look, this could have an impact. Very few people are talking about that because politics is all the rage.
Yeah, but you know, even before they went on strike, even on Business Morning, we have been calling on the Standards Organization of Nigeria, because when we talk about exports and all that, one of the things that actually deter other countries from exporting Nigerian products, even our consumption here, is the quality. And so we've been calling on Standards Organization of Nigeria, but they are yet to respond. And we do hope that very soon...
No, there's situations that make people sometimes have to step to the plate. Indeed. Thank you so much, Ini. There'll be more of that and all the other stories in business, not just related to the war in Ukraine, but generally right after this program on Business Morning, and then later on in the day on Business Incorporated. Ini and Ladi Williams, as usual, will be here to do justice to that. Thank you, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
And as we've been reporting, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has paid a visit to wounded servicemen in a hospital in eastern Dnipro. where he presented medals to soldiers in their hospital beds. Last week, Mr. Zelensky had visited troops along the Dnipropetrovsk front line. The visit came a day after 3 people had been killed and another 5 wounded after Russian forces shelled Kharkiv. In eastern Ukraine, Russian forces kept up the pressure on Ukrainian troops, trying to hold the line along the northern borders of the Donetsk region. Let's talk some sports. Wimbledon champion Elena Rybakina was overcome with emotion after she was questioned over her Russian roots following her victory against Ons Jabeur in the final on Saturday. Miss Rybakina was born in Moscow but switched allegiance to Kazakhstan in 2018 on financial grounds, as she was considered surplus to requirements by the Russian Tennis Federation. Russian and Belarusian players were prohibited from competing at the event by organizers, the All England Lawn Tennis Club, in response to the invasion of Ukraine. Ms. Rybakina who has frequently been asked questions surrounding her nationality, and she further shrugged off this topic, as well as the issue of the Russian government's politicizing her Grand Slam win. The 23-year-old's parents still live in Moscow.
Probably they're going to be super proud.
Okay. Should we wrap up there?
You wanted to see emotion? Kept it too long. From my side, I can only say that I'm representing Kazakhstan, and I didn't choose where I was born. People believed in me. Kazakhstan supported me so much. Even today, I heard so many support, and I saw the flags. So I don't know how to answer on these questions.
Former Formula One Supremo Bernie Ecclestone has apologized for his comments about Russian President Vladimir Putin after he appeared to defend the war he has started in Ukraine. In a bizarre interview with Good Morning Britain, Mr. Ecclestone affirmed that he would still, quote, take a bullet for Putin, indicating that he's like a lot of business people. Mr. Ecclestone has now admitted his comments were inappropriate while expressing his sympathy for the people of Ukraine, millions of whom have been forced to flee their homeland as a result of the war. Former Formula One quickly moved to distance themselves from Ecclestone's initial comments, stating that they were in, quote, very stark contrast to the position of the modern values of the sport. The Carolina Hurricanes have used 4 of their 7 draft picks to select Russian players at the National Hockey League draft in Montreal, Canada, despite tensions between Russia, the United States, and Canada. The franchise used the 60th pick, their first of the draft, to choose forward Gleb Trikozov in the second round at the Bell Center. The following round saw the Hurricanes pick up forward Alexander Perevalov at number 71, as well as defenseman Vladimir Grudinin in the 5th round with the 156th pick, while Alexander Pelevin was selected at number 205 in the 7th round. Concern over the availability of Russian players has remained in the NHL due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Travel restrictions between the U.S. and Russia have been imposed and has caused the NHL to question whether Russian picks will be permitted to enter the country. And finally, thousands of cyclists took part in a summer bicycle parade in the Russian capital over the weekend. Many participants, including Yuri Stensovich, who wore a T-shirt with "Metal Against Corona" writing on it, welcomed the lifting of COVID restrictions at this year's event. Parade organizers said the route chosen for the event could be a way of avoiding Moscow's notoriously busy traffic while cycling. This year's parade took place months after Russia sent troops to Ukraine in February, calling it a special operation to demilitarize the country. Since then, cities have been bombed to rubble, thousands have been killed, and millions displaced. And it's on that note that we end the program this morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm Ladi Akuru. There'll be an update within the world today at 5 p.m. Do watch out for that. But for now, do go out there and have a pleasant continuation of your summer holiday.